I'm an Associate Director of Programs here at Achieving the Dream, and I will take a minute to introduce my colleagues who are on this webinar presentation with me. Carol Lincoln, our Senior Vice President. Nicole Melander, our Chief Technology Officer. Rachel Singer, our Associate Vice President for Community College Research. Rhonda Glover, Senior Director of Data Coaching. Sarah Hollister, our Associate Director of Programs. Jessica Tompkins, our AmeriCorps Vista. And Emma Fisher, our new Program Policy Intern. Since this is a webinar, I want to talk a little bit about the technology we're using first. We want to make sure to have a bit of interaction and allow you to have all of the questions that you have answered. So you'll see, just like what's showing on the slideshow, you too have a control panel. It will disappear every once in a while, so make sure to hit the Grab tab, which is at B, if your control panel decides to hide itself. I want to also make sure that you see the questions pane on your control panel, because if at any time throughout the webinar, if you have a question, you can type it in. We will hold questions for a few portions of today's presentation, and we'll make sure to answer those questions during those times. So again, if you have questions, certainly type them into the questions bar, and we will respond to those questions at a few designated times throughout the webinar. So first, why an annual reflection? The annual reflection provides an opportunity for you to consider your institution's Achieving the Dream over the past year and to plan for the coming year. This reflection will be reviewed by Achieving the Dream and your coaching team, and you'll receive feedback from Achieving the Dream in late summer of 2013. All ATD colleges are required to submit an annual reflection. Please note that colleges who are in the 2012 cohort will complete an implementation proposal. Brief overview of the agenda. We'll have a few minutes to present about the annual reflection components, and then we want to devote most of the time today for questions and feedback from you. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will later be posted to the Annual Reflections webpage. So first, an overview of the components. These are all components of the annual reflection. The first is the Principals Assessment Survey, and that's the one to put your attention on now. If you're using an online survey, then we ask that you and your colleagues submit survey responses by April 18th. The next components are due on May 15th. And they are the Annual Reflections Narrative, the Intervention Showcase update, and if your college is applying for Leader College status, you will complete the Leader College application. Those are all due May 15th. Now I'm going to show you the Annual Reflections webpage. It may take a second to load. If you're viewing from your computer, you may certainly pull up the Annual Reflections webpage, achievingthedream.org/annual reflection, and I'll continue showing a PowerPoint presentation. Just one moment while we open the PowerPoint presentation again. Okay, so we are at the Annual Reflection page. This is the page that I thought we wouldn't be able to pull up, but we did indeed. And I wanted to first draw your attention to the Principals Assessment Survey. There are two ways that your college may choose to administer the survey. The first is to administer it online. You would just click this link to see the the Principals Assessment Survey. If you choose this option, then anonymous survey responses will be sent to Achieving the Dream. And Achieving the Dream will be able to aggregate responses and send results to your core team lead. You can use this when writing the Annual Reflection narrative. The second option is for your college to download a copy of the survey and to structure a group reflection and complete the survey. Remember, if you're submitting this online, April 18th is the deadline. The next component that I'd like to discuss is the Annual Reflection narrative. You will complete the Annual Reflection narrative using the template online, and there are 7 sections to this Annual Reflection narrative. I'm scrolling through so you can see the 7 sections, but I want to focus on each one in order. First part, in this Annual Reflection, you will reflect on activities between May 2012 and April 2013. And to go through the different sections, the first part is contributors to the Annual Reflection. You'll be able to complete all of your responses in this template document. And you'll just, in this chart, name the contributors to the Annual Reflection and their titles. You could add more rows to this table as necessary, depending on how many contributors you have to your Annual Reflection. The second section is the progress statement. And really what we want for your college to focus on in this question is, how has the reform work changed the student experience at your institution? In the next question, we'd like for you to focus on the institution context. So positive and negative factors that are affecting the student success efforts at your institution. Principals assessment relates to the Principals Assessment Survey that I just mentioned. In this question, we'll ask for you to comment on the Principals Assessment Survey results. Scrolling on to the 5th section. And in this section, we'd like for your college to on the disaggregated data for the 5 Achieving the Dream student success measures. We'd like for you to summarize and explain this data. We've had some questions from colleges related to this student success data question. And because we have Rhonda Glover in the room, I'd like to make sure that she can respond to any questions that you have on the specific data question, question 5. And if you have questions, please type them into the question bar, and we will respond now, specifically to the. So we're reviewing specific questions right now.
Okay, we have a question about the redundancy in question 5, about the differences between section C in the 2nd paragraph and what is asked for in the 3rd paragraph. And I think when this was originally designed in draft mode, there was some discussion about submitting some templates with this for you, and we decided that was going to be too cumbersome for you, would require too much. So you're absolutely right, questioner, that there is redundancy. The idea is first that you would want to describe your progress, explaining in the data what you see as differences between this year and last. If you've only been a participant for a couple of years, have a lot of retro look. But if you've been participating for 6 years or 5 years, then you certainly might choose to look over a longer period of time and address any fluctuations in the data, any rises or any steep falls. Then we would ask that you consider how you've done as far as changing and narrowing and closing achievement gaps between different groups, such as between different ethnic groups, between different age groups, and other categories that we've listed for you. And so the part D would be that you describe your plans for addressing any of the increases or decreases, and for at least one measure, just one, do you provide a data graph or a data table. So it's not necessary for you to provide a data graph and a data table for all 5 measures. We're hoping that you will take the time to review that data and then comment on it in the paragraphs as described here, and comment on the differences between the years, and comment on the gap analysis that you conducted, and then present as an example your best data. I would present the best data that you have that you want to choose of one of the 5 measures. Any other questions?
Yeah, Rhonda, I can just read the question for you. We have another question on the data. We have several other questions, and we're definitely going to get to those, but we just want to focus in on some of the data-related ones now. This is one of my favorite questions. Please define the cohort we should report on.
Yes. Yeah, it's a common question, and certainly understandable that people would want to know how you choose to define it. We are, in all of the work that we're doing, particularly with your colleges, if you have those aspirations, we're asking for colleges to consider larger groups. So if you're just looking at maybe an orientation of 100 students, or you're just looking at an intervention level data, that's not the cohort data we're seeking. We're asking you to look at one of the 5 measures, and it may be that you're looking at first time in college degree seeking students that entered in fall. It may be that you're looking at first time in college degree seeking students who were mandated into developmental ed in fall, and you're tracking them over time, or mandated into developmental math, or mandated into developmental English, so that you can have a high level, large segment of the student population in order to measure your outcomes. This is not reporting on the intervention. This is reporting at the cohort level of one of the 5 measures.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda. We have a comment here from one of our data coaches, a great comment, that to remind colleges that they can use the ATD data tool should they want to. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, you can certainly do that if you want to look at the cohort data over time. And we hope that many of you who have been with us participating with this for a number of years are also building the capacity internally to do cohort tracking. That's what we're certainly encouraging colleges to do. And the most important thing is that you take this data, you understand what your outcomes are, you measure results and compare them, and that you determine if there needs to be adjustment in your continuous improvement process to some of the interventions or other work that you're doing. For instance, if you have a retention measure and you've been targeting several different interventions to impact that, and nothing's moving the needle on your cohort, then there's a good time for you to look deeper. And so that's the kind of thinking that we want you to do. Sometimes in the ATD data tool, there may be such a large cohort in that group of all entering students. If you are not identifying FDIC students, you might not be able to measure discreetly enough the differences in these changes.
Thank you. We have another question about whether colleges must provide a chart or graph for each of the 5 measures. And the response is the colleges must provide a chart or graph for one of the 5 measures. But of course, the colleges will review the data for each of the 5 measures.
Here, I'm sorry. Again, technical difficulties. Just to clarify, a clarifying question about the cohort group again. Will that be the same for all 5 measures then? Will it necessarily be the same cohort group that you're looking at for all 5 measures?
Sometimes that's a bit impossible to do. For example, if you're looking at the measure for completion, and there haven't been 4 years that have passed for a student to possibly complete a degree or certificate or a diploma, so you might not be able to track that one with exactly the same cohort. And for example, if you're looking at developmental education, you may be looking at only those students who tested into developmental education, not all students, because your college-ready students would be in that cohort and you may not want to include them. And when you're measuring how many have completed their developmental ed because they never needed developmental ed. So that's the kind of nuance you need to look at your cohort level. But it still should be a significantly sized cohort, not intervention level data.
Another question here. Can a college look at the disaggregated mix for fall 2012, so half of a year, and then make the comparison with previous years, such as 2011, 2012, 2010, 2011?
If you're looking at a fall-to-fall comparison, you can certainly do that. If you're looking at an entire year in previous years and only a partial year in the current year, you're not going to show any sense of comparisons. You're going to show a strange outcome that doesn't relate to anything. So we would ask that you consider carefully how you compare the cohorts over time. And if only through fall of 2012 is the most recent data you have, then we encourage you to use that. However, if you're looking at fall to spring retention, for example, you could look at your spring enrollees who don't have to have grades or outcomes at this point, but they just simply re-enrolled in spring semester, then you might be able to choose that measure as well.
Great. there's a question about, is it okay to look at the benchmarking data when you're looking? I assume this is in regards to data tools when you're kind of looking at these measures.
I would like to ask the questioner to please type back in and say, are you thinking of benchmarking with other colleges?
Yes.
Is that what your point is? That's not really what the annual reflection document is about. If you want to add that element, you certainly could add it, but not substitute it. So you would want to present your data, and you would want to present the outcomes and analyze what you have discovered in it. And if you want to say that we also looked at benchmarking data, and here's what we found. We fell in the middle, we were at the top, whatever that information provided, but it certainly would not be in lieu of.
Great, we have another cohort question. The question is, a cohort would include, I think this is an example that they're giving, students from May 2012 to April 2013. This would include students in the spring term where the majority of them have not. Should we include only students that have completed their courses? Alternatively, can we use a different date range?
Right. As mentioned a little bit earlier, if you're looking at a fall to spring measure for retention, then you certainly don't need end-of-term grades. But if you're looking at completing the developmental ed sequence in X amount of time, or if you're comparing over time those who complete their developmental ed sequence each of the cohort years, then you certainly would need end of spring term. So you would stop at fall term for that type of data.
We have another question here, and I'm wondering if this question might be a little bit related to college application as well. The question is, our data in prior annual reports reflections have shown results for cohorts in the specific initiatives disaggregated by our target groups, for example, age 25 and lower, African American, males, etc. Success and persistence rates to a comparison group. This fraction in number 5 instead looks at the whole fall new student cohort. We would, and that's a question, like, would it have to look at the whole fall new student cohort? And the question is, would we have to redo our data for past years? And that Pell has not been one of our data points. Is it required for them to disaggregate by Pell, Meredith?
No. I think we would encourage you, if you have shown, if you can't get to it in a timely way, then we understand that. We would encourage you to look at all disaggregated levels as your data analysis presents to you. But I think this question was asking about initiatives or interventions. And so what this annual reflection does is request that colleges look at the higher level cohort level rather than the intervention level data, unless your entire entering student population is receiving that intervention. For instance, if it's mandated that all first-time in college students must take a student success course, if it's mandated that they must attend orientation, receive counseling for 3 times a semester or twice a year or whatever the terminologies are, and every single student who's in that entering cohort is being treated, then certainly they would be one and the same.
Great. A couple more questions regarding data. Is the online ATD tool the sole source for student success measures, or can we use state-certified and institutional data as well and note the source?
We're certainly encouraging you to do your own institutional data. As probably everyone on the phone is aware, many states define things very differently. You know the Achieving the Dream cohort groups and the FDIC population, and it's not, for instance, an iPad, if it's just first-time, full-time, that's not appropriate for this report. we're looking at colleges being able to conduct analyses of their own data. If the definitions in your state happen to coincide identically to achieving the dream, then that would be a possibility.
Great. Next question related to data. Do you have definitions for developmental courses, credit-bearing courses, gateway courses? Is there a time limit after completing the developmental for the student to enroll in the credit-bearing course?
Developmental education or remediation is typically less than college level, and primarily it is in the areas of reading, math, and English. The coursework is prescribed by an entrance test, and sometimes students are designated to take 2 or more levels of developmental ed in any or all of those areas. The time frames that are typical in achieving the dream that most colleges find the most reasonable is 2 years for completing developmental ed if you were mandated into developmental ed, 3 years for completing your gateway courses, and gateway courses are typically defined at the college, but the primary 2 gateway courses are college algebra and freshman composition. Some colleges include other courses like anatomy and physiology because they have a high level or a high number of enrollees in allied health programs that require that course. Some include sociology and psychology because they have that. Those are the gateways. Those are the credit level gateways that can make the difference in whether the student is able to continue toward a degree, certificate, or diploma. And for completion, we typically use a 4-year marker. So 2 years for completing developmental ed if you're mandated, 3 years for completing your college level coursework, and 4 years for completing some sort of market level diploma, certificate, or degree.
Great. Thank you so much for answering those data-related questions. I think we have answered all the current data-related questions, so I think we're ready to move on, Meredith.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rhonda, and thank you so much, Sarah. I do want to take a minute to go back to the higher level for the annual reflection overall and talk about how the annual reflection is really designed to be useful to you. This is not a compliance report, and we'd like for it to have the ability to hone in on issues that are going to advance learning for you as part of the Achieving the Dream National Reform Network. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the 2 options for the principal's assessment. And specifically, we wanted to make sure that you had the online option that would help minimize your work with aggregation. But if you have concerns about Achieving the Dream seeing individual responses, even though they are anonymous, we cannot see who specifically submitted an individual response, you may certainly choose to do all of the survey compilation on paper or through your own online survey system. So I wanted to make sure to share those comments about the annual reflection overall. Next, I'll finish reviewing each of the sections of the annual reflection. So after the data question, you'll see 2 more sections. One is student successor completion efforts. And for this, we'd like for you to check any box for other student success and completion efforts that your college is involved in. And you can just click and check any others that your college may be involved in. You may also, if there are any that are not listed, you may certainly type them in right here. The final section is there any additional information that you would like to share in this annual reflection? And so perhaps there are leadership changes that you want to share with us. Perhaps you are part of a really exciting new initiative that you wanted to share more information about. This is the appropriate section to respond to that, to share that type of information. So that wraps up our review of the annual reflection narrative. The next section of the annual reflection overall that I'd like to address is the intervention showcase. So we'll take a minute to show that. And so you may be asking yourself, what is the intervention showcase? You haven't seen it yet. Well, the intervention showcase was piloted at Dream 2013. So some folks had the chance to see it, and some folks were just so busy that you weren't able to see it. So we want to show you some screenshots as a preview. Overall, what the intervention showcase does is it illustrates the student success interventions of colleges across the Achieving the Dream National Reform Network. We're very excited about this, and we got feedback from many of you and many of your colleagues at Dream that this is a very useful tool. And the part of the annual reflection that the intervention showcase is it's an update. So what will you need to do? You will need to provide an update to each of the intervention descriptions that you shared with Achieving the Dream in April 2012 when you completed your annual report in 2012. And if your college has any new student success interventions, then you'll want to enter them into the intervention showcase. The good thing is this is an easy online system. So next up, a little bit about what it'll look like. So I mentioned that the intervention showcase will showcase student success interventions from across the network, and you will be able to search based on many different criteria. So this is an example of what the very beginning of a search might look like if your target population is ESL, ESOL, or ELL students. Here's an example of what the interventions showcase might show if you're looking specifically for course redesign for English courses. This is the high-level view. You'll be able to see snapshot information about, for example, interventions in equity. So you see the name of the intervention, you see the specific institution at which the intervention is being implemented, the type of intervention, a description, and you'll also be able to see contact information in case you want to follow up with someone at a college about their student success intervention. Here's the big picture, the interventions and the little picture. So here's all the details that are in the intervention showcase about each student success intervention. And some things that you'll want to think about collecting now for an intervention are, so for an intervention, you'll have a couple numbers questions, like number of students in the target population total for a reporting year, number of all students served by this intervention in this reporting year, and number of students in the target population served by the intervention in this reporting year. Again, this is at the intervention level. While this form looks very long, it is an online form. You'll have drop-down boxes, and it'll be very easy to complete. You'll also just be updating information from the previous year. So you'll have a text box, for example, in which you can edit the summary that's already been entered. You'll have some radio buttons that you can click or drop downs that you can select. And when you're finished, it'll look like this. So I've talked about the three components of the annual reflection: the principals assessment survey, the annual reflection narrative, and the intervention showcase update. I know some of you have been entering questions throughout the presentation, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to respond to those questions now. So if you have any additional questions, please enter them into the questions bar.
Great. One of the questions we've gotten a couple times, Meredith, is if you don't do the survey online, meaning the principal survey online, is it due with the narrative submission? So how does that work if you don't do the online principals assessment?
So if you don't do the online principals assessment, we certainly encourage you to keep the principals assessment survey on file, but you are not required to submit it with the annual reflection narrative.
So in other words, the aggregated responses that you might use to draft your comments in the annual reflection narrative do not need to be submitted to Achieving the Dream. I think perhaps some of the confusion comes in the form that there's actually two parts to the principals assessment work that you have to do for your annual reflection. One is completing the ratings principals assessment survey, and then the second piece that everyone does is comment on these results in the annual reflection narrative. So everyone will be commenting on that principals assessment in their narrative. They just don't have to actually hand in the copy of their results.
Thanks, Sarah.
Great. So let's see. Another question here. If we're a college that joined Achieving the Dream in 2011, June, and we implemented initiatives in fall 2012, do we really have any significant data to report?
So specifically, you'll want to share the intervention description and share as much information as you have available on this intervention, even if it has not is not producing results yet, and you have not been able to measure those at the annual reflection submission time.
And I think I read this. I think this could go two ways, because you're submitting data or information about your interventions in the intervention showcase, right? But then you're also looking at your student outcome data over several years. And so I see that colleges that are been in Achieving the Dream only a few years might think, oh, I don't really have any student outcome data to look at. But they, colleges do have ways of pulling data and looking at that data over time. So we encourage all of the colleges, no matter where they are in their Achieving the Dream experience, to pull the data and look at the data over time and look at the cohorts and to have a discussion about how the colleges can address any places where students are not succeeding.
Thanks, Sarah. We have a question specifically about the intervention showcase. And the question is, what if we've discontinued an intervention that was still active when we reported last year, so last April? So you will have the option for each intervention to show if it's a planned intervention, if it's an active intervention, or if it's a discontinued intervention. Thanks. Good question.
If we did not provide information for the showcase for DREAM, password or link be provided for us to enter the information for the first time?
Good question. If you did not provide information for the showcase at DREAM, you will still be able to access the intervention showcase. What we'll do is we'll send you an email the week of April 15th, And that will give you information about how to log in to the intervention showcase because it is password protected. If you have forgotten or did not use a password before, then you will be able to reset your password.
Okay, I have another great question here. Is the annual financial report still required?
If your college has a funder that requires an annual financial report, your college has been notified. Otherwise, you will not need to complete an annual financial report.
Great. I'm just going to go back up and make sure that we get some of the questions from before the data conversation. Question here, is there a specific number of people or specific individuals who should complete the principals assessment survey?
So for this question, and specifically for who you would like to complete the principals assessment survey, one of the reasons that we gave you the option to complete the survey online is that you could send this to many, many people throughout the college, and you would have an easy way to aggregate the information. But it's really up to you. Who do you want to make sure to respond to the principal's assessment? Is it the core team? Does it include faculty and staff? Use your discretion in choosing who completes the principal's assessment survey.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, since this principal's assessment is, also a component of that is used for Leader College status as well as Leader College recertification, that we certainly do encourage you to broadly engage your college in when you're having this discussion and when you're filling out the survey. So part of the reason, as Meredith said, we did the online tool was to assist colleges in engaging a larger portion of your campus in these student success discussions. Okay, going down here on the narrative for reaffirmation of accreditations. We are in the process of writing for reaffirmation, but don't submit it until 2014. Do we check this box?
So in response, so specifically looking at question 6, because you're in the process of reaffirmation of accreditation, then yes, you would check that box. Thank you.
Just going down to make sure that I've gotten all the questions from before we started.
You're asking good questions. Thank you.
There is another question about cohorts, and it is true that they should be larger samples of impacted students, such as first time in college or all developmental ed students, and that's the same for completion as well. So whatever the 5 outcome measures that you're looking at, you would use the same parameters when defining your cohort. Will this webinar be archived for those colleges who are not participating, and will you send out notifications?
Yes, we are recording this webinar, and we will post it on the annual reflection webpage that I scrolled through earlier during the webinar. We will also be able to send out notification when the webinar is posted. Typically, we post our webinars as YouTube videos.
We have another few questions here. We have another question here about defining cohorts. In number 5B, completion of college-level gateway courses, do we use the whole new student cohort or only use the students who started in the developmental to track them through? Okay, so this is, I think, maybe I'm going to go back and try and describe a little bit what we mean by cohorts of students. You're not necessarily going to be looking at, for example, the completion of developmental education for all students who are placed in, our first time in college students who are placed not into developmental education. So you want to look at each measure and look at and define your cohort of students that you're looking at based on that measure. So it makes sense if you're, for example, how many students, what's the percentage of students that have entered developmental education and moved on to Gateway Math, entered as developmental education in math and then moved on to the Gateway course in math. Obviously, the large cohort that you would be looking at there would be all students placed in developmental math education. What we're trying to get away from here is looking at, for example, all those students who were placed into developmental math and we put in a special intervention that is accelerated math. And it's a small cohort of students and the rest of the students didn't necessarily get that intervention. So we're looking at the success of those students who have just moved through the intervention versus the entire group of students have been placed into developmental math. That's where we're getting with this conversation about cohorts. I know that it can be confusing at times, so if anyone feels like they'd like to have a further conversation about it, please do reach out to Achieving the Dream at info@achievingthedream.org, or even better, your data coach. And we'd be happy to facilitate some conversations about that. Okay, another question for student success data. For A, are we only supposed to be reporting on first-time in college students, for example, in fall 2012, or all students who enrolled in a course in the fall? And what if students were enrolled in our college 3 to 5 years ago? Yeah, this is another instance, I think, where we're getting into a little bit of details that it might be better if we maybe have a conversation over the phone about this, because I'm clear that the cohort definition piece is a little bit confusing. So I would suggest you reach out to your data coach with that question, and if you're not able to, get them, or if they have further questions for us, they can reach out to Achieving the Dream, and we'll facilitate a conversation. This is a question from a college saying that in prior reports, they've looked back with starting in 2008 fall cohort, which I assume is what I assume that means all students, first time in college students in the fall cohort. And they say that we have only tracked the intervention cohort and comparison groups. For the reflection, should we go back to 2008 and track the whole new fall cohort through to completion? Again, I think that we're looking at larger cohorts here, but we're not asking you to redo your data. The data should be there and should be able to be easily pulled, especially using data tools. If this isn't the case, of course, we can work with you and your data coach to determine what kind of assistance we might be able to give you. Do you have anything more you want to say on that, Meredith?
No, thanks, Sarah.
Another question, is a grade of C or better used to define successful course completion?
Yes, a grade of C or better is used to define successful course completion.
Okay, great question. Another great question about the principal's assessment. If we send core team members a link to take the online principal's assessment individually, how do we access our college's results so we can view them and refer to them in the narrative portion?
That's an excellent question. So if your college chooses to complete the principal's assessment survey individually and online, if you complete the principal's assessment survey by April 18th, Achieving the Dream will send the aggregated results to your core team leader the week of April 22nd. So it'll be a nice report that shows the aggregated responses. Thank you.
And another question related to that.
So same question. So again, just to reaffirm, if a college chooses to complete the principal's assessment survey online following the link that we provided, if the survey responses are in by April 18th, then we will send a report of the aggregated responses the week of April 22nd.
And another question related to the principal's assessment. Is there a way for us to have a count of how many responses to the principal's assessment you've received? And I assume that's from their specific college.
Sure. You can email info@achievingthedream.org, and we could tell you how many responses we've received so far from your college.
And the final report will also receive.
Right. The final report will also give the number of responses.
That's a great question. How do you know which college sent the submissions?
So the way that we know which college sent the submissions is that there are two fields on the survey, and these are fields in which the survey responder writes the name of the institution and the iPad ID number of the college. And we have a list of those linked from the survey.
And if you are going to use the online survey, you just want to make sure that the people that you're going to be sending the survey to know to complete those two fields. And there's a list of iPad numbers
on the survey.
They should be able to find the number easily. I think we're almost at time, and I think we've addressed all of the questions so far.
Wonderful. Well, again, we at Achieving the Dream thank you so much for taking the time to log in to this webinar and ask all of the good questions that you did. If you have further questions as you complete your annual reflection, certainly you may contact your leadership and data coach, and you may also contact Achieving the Dream at info@achievingthedream.org. So thanks again. We will be posting the recorded version of this webinar online within the coming week. Thanks.